Santa Cruz getting into 4-bar and doing it this well, it's kind of like when the Beastie Boys dropped Sabotage and everyone at the metal clubs I used to go to went, "What? Wait? Who?" Hello, the internet. I'm Guy Kestevan, veteran bike tester, and this is the brand new Santa Cruz Vala E-Mtb. A 160mm fork, 150mm rear travel, mullet wheeled, 29 front, 27.5-inch rear, powered by the latest Bosch Performance CX Gen 5 motor and their new power tube battery. So a bike in many ways very similar to other bikes you can already buy, not least Trek, Cube, Mondraker, Norco, Focus, Highbike, who all released, and probably more, who all released bikes with this motor and very similar travel and wheel arrangements to this bike yesterday. So why have Santa Cruz changed to a 4-bar suspension platform rather than their 22-year history with their virtual pivot point linkage system and the distinctive silhouette that brings? And what are the differences that still separate this bike from the rest of the herd? And obviously, how does that affect the ride? Though, if you want to go straight to that, then you're best off going straight to my live ride video, which I'll link at the end of this, and then coming back here for the more in-depth, obviously static bike tech check that I'm going to do now. So first things first, the whole 4-bar rocker linkage switch. Santa Cruz have gone for this with, rocker linkage up there, driving the shock, pivot on the chain stays there, and then main pivot here, because they could not fit their VPP suspension linkage system, which puts the main pivot much lower down there, has a whole linkage running through underneath the seat tube, into a bike with even though this Bosch motor is considerably smaller, it's still big enough to sit right where they would need to put the pivot point for the lower linkages to mimic the latest changes they've made to their suspension kinematic. Because if you've watched the Bronson and the Hightower videos I've done, you'll have seen they've moved to a much lower anti-squat, so less rearward pullback, less pedal influence in the suspension for a more neutral, smoother ride overall. And they just couldn't package that suspension system with the new Bosch motor. And there's actually a little overlay diagram which I'll pop on top here so you can see where that linkage would have been if they tried to put it in there, and essentially you'll see it sits right in the middle of the motor. So although on the Heckler SL, which was obviously the last e-bike they brought out with a Fazua motor, they got it pretty close because the Fazua is a much smaller motor. That had an anti-squat of 133 down to 50 depending where you were in the travel, whereas this has got an anti-squat of 118 to 78. But if you look at something like the original Heckler with the big Shimano motor in it, that's actually got an anti-squat of 160 down to 50. So as you'll see, the anti-squat on this bike is much more balanced. So you're getting a more predictable response from the back end and a more consistent feel through your feet as well. And the other aspect that is a real gain in terms of braking performance is that the anti-rise, so how much the suspension changes as you brake, basically through the influence of that disc brake on the back, the way it jacks up when you slam those big Maven brakes on, has dropped off dramatically on this Vala. It's now 63 to 74% on this bike, whereas on the Heckler 9, the original Heckler, it's 112 to 40. And you can really feel that when you're riding this bike over steep, chunky stuff, where you're still trying to get that traction and that stopping power through that big brake without the whole suspension just locking out and slapping about. It just feels much more balanced and settled overall, whether you're pedaling or whether you're braking. That's the big advantage of going to this 4-bar system. But, as a response, it doesn't quite have that pedal kick and pop that you may traditionally associate with the Santa Cruz. It's much more similar. It's practically identical, in fact, to the new Bronson bike, whereas they've kept a little more pop and play in the new Hightower. But then, it shares that mixed mullet wheel setup with the Bronson as well, and the same travel. In fact, I think the only thing that's changed on the geometry compared to the Bronson is that the head angle is fractionally slacker, and the seat tube on this is a fair degree shallower. I mean, we're literally around a degree shallower. It's 77.2, 77.5, whereas the Bronson is 77.9, 78.2. But apart from that, reach is 480 on this bike, apart from 478 on the Bronson and the Heckler SL. And the head angle on this bike is 63.9 or 64.2, depending on where you put that little high-low chip you can see there on the back of the linkage. Before I forget, there's also a progression change linkage there, which means you can change your shock progression from 26 to 29% just by sliding the foot of the shock backwards and forwards. And those two adjustments work independently. So previously there was a suspension change with the high-low link, but because of the way the 4-bar operates differently to the VPP, you also can isolate those two characteristics. And other things, I mean, I'm kind of losing track. I'm kind of jumping around here, typically for me. But the other thing is, obviously, that's a hell of a lot easier to get to the shock, to see the sag and travel and get to the adjusters, and they're all up the top there, and it's a neater package than trying to ferret around in the bowels of the belly of the bike. Plus, it means you get a full interrupted seat tube, so you can run a lot longer dropper posts as standard, and the bikes are coming fitted with those from the factory. And that, you know, if you've seen me a little roast video about how difficult the high-low chip was to change previously, that is way, way easier to access. But the things Santa Cruz have maintained, even though the suspension system looks radically different and behaves quite differently, they've still kept that same collet bearing system. So you've got rebuildable, adjustable pivots. You've got extra large bearings in all the other bearing points. You've got a trunnion mounted shock, and all those bearings are still lifetime warranted. And then on the rear here, on this really neat chainstay pivot, you've got two bearings on each side. And I have to say, you can clearly feel how precise. This is what I mean. You can see this is a chunky old swing arm on there. Big, deep chainstays again with this new style Santa Cruz paddle chain protector on there. That it feels, I described it to someone as feeling like you're using a really, really well-weighted butcher's cleaver. So the whole bike feels really light and kind of clean and easy to handle. But when you go chunk, when you start chopping it through the rocks or serious chunk and just trying to hold a line, this goes through everything like a proper chopper through butter. It is genuinely very noticeable how this bike feels and how precise and clean it feels, which is kind of in line with the whole precise, clean looks. This new power tube battery, God, I am jumping around all over the place. This whole new power tube battery, it's the highest power density battery that Bosch have ever done, and Santa Cruz have stuck with a 600 rather than 800 because that saves them a kilo in battery weight and also just keeps the form factor of the bike down. So I have to say, the whole bike, I mean, it's no twisty noodle, but it doesn't feel quite as brutal and blunt as some of their other e-bikes have in the past. And I think the whole bike just looks neater. And if you need that extra range, then you can just plug in the Bosch PowerMore range extender for an extra 250 watt hours of power, taking up to 850. And while we're talking about weight, the whole bike comes in at 21.44 kilos for this large without pedals, which is interesting, actually lighter than Santa Cruz claimed for a medium. So very rare that a manufacturer actually claims their bikes are heavier than I weigh them at. So that's a good sign, isn't it? And that, should we jump around some more? Let's jump around some more. And that's including not only a Santa Cruz Reserve DH rim, so that's the heaviest duty carbon lifetime warranted rim they do, but also Schwalbe Magic Mary Gravity soft radial rear tyre and Magic Mary Trail ultra soft front. So these are the latest. I mean, it's the first time I've seen these spec'd as standard on any bike. The latest, what they call a radial car, because it's actually not radial, it's more just slightly more diagonal than normal carcass tyre in the softest, grippiest compound that Schwalbe do. And these are proper, I mean, these are steel toe cap boot tyres. These are proper super damped, high grip gravity tyres. You know, this is not a lightweight skip along trail spec by any means. when it comes to the rolling stock. Although you do get the HD rim up front rather than the DH rim. But again, matching that gravity-inspired tyre choice, you've got the new SRAM Maven brakes for maximum stopping power there. There's none of that small rotor stuff they did with the Hightower here. That's a full-size 200mm rear rotor on there. Because again, you're able to use that a lot more because there's less brake jack, there's less disturbance. It's on the suspension when you pull on those levers. And and you've got the silver version here, so you've got reach adjust and you've got pad control. And it takes a bit of getting used to at first because they are hella powerful. But when you're trying to stop an e-bike on steep terrain, then a lot of power is a very useful thing to have. And while we're talking spec, you've got Fox 38 fork with the new Grip X2 damper, which again just feels much better with the extra weight of the bike sat on top of it than it does on their non-powered bikes. Still a very precise and concise feeling fork, not a sort of plushy mushy soft pillow ride, but very much suits the rest of the bike. And then you've got a Fox Float X shock on the rear, and they're both in factory spec on this Exo Axis version. And as it's Exo Axis, you get the Exo crank, you get the Exo Axis transmission T-type rear mech, you get that 1052 T-type cassette on there for that slightly slower but absolutely guaranteed good time shifting that works particularly well in an e-bike format. And then you get pod controller up here as well. You don't get an Axis seat post, which you might do on some Axis bikes, but you get this really reliable, user serviceable, cable operated one-up post on there. Instead, I kind of don't really feel qualified to talk too much about the new Bosch CX motor system, as I'm not massively experienced with e-bikes, but you get similar controller to before. You can go up through the various modes. You get Eco, Tour, E-Mtb and Turbo, and you can also control them through this little wireless controller on there. And the beauty of this system now is it's entirely wireless, so you don't even have to, that's got your headlight switch if you have a headlight, it's got your walk control, it's also got a hill start assist where the bike will actually hold you stationary until you start pedaling, which is quite a novelty idea. I didn't actually get to try it on the trail yet, but I'll see how that works and try it on my second ride on this bike, which I'll also film as kind of more of a in-depth review. And also you can, while this is just all a self-contained display on here, simple analog display, you can get a Purion 400 head unit to sit on there, and that connects wireless, and that gives you all your ride and rider data, so distance, speed, battery, the power you're putting into it and stuff like that. And then down at the motor itself, it's a much smaller form factor. It's now attached with just 2 bolts, and to be honest, there's a lot of hype about it being lighter. It's only 100 grams lighter out of a 2.8 kilo motor, so that's slightly less, slightly more than 3%, I think. So it's not a huge deal, but it is fractionally lighter. But it produces the same amount of power, so 85 newton meters with a 600 watt maximum boost, and it's more efficient as well. So you're getting about the same range out of a 600 watt battery as you would out of a 650 watt battery previously. And the other thing is now they've completely decoupled the crankset essentially from the internal gearing. So if you watch my live ride review, it's basically completely silent. There's none of the lock. There's none of the knock and clunk as they used to be with this motor. And also, overall, it's a really, really quiet unit now. Very, very quiet. So obviously, they've responded to people getting excited about people like TQ and Fazua producing quieter motors, and they've come back with a similarly quiet motor themselves. And the massive win with Bosch, and this goes really, really well with Santa Cruz, because Santa Cruz are a company that pride themselves on really good lifetime warranties on the frames, on their rims, on the bearings I've already talked about before, and just a higher level of customer care through specially selected dealers, is that Bosch are pretty much leading the field when it comes to motor reliability and support service backup. So it is a great teaming. Yeah, there's going to be people spitting feathers about them dropping VPP, but that's what they had to do to get Bosch in there, and Bosch really does bring a lot of advantages to the Santa Cruz e-bike game. Although, of course, the whole e-bike game in general has changed a lot with people like DJI and Pinion coming into it. So it'd be interesting to see what Bosch actually do next. One of my Patreon subscribers, Dave Freeman, pointed out that's a new base plate. It's a much bigger base plate under that little, although that's pretty much the same. That whole area, the fact that that's now blanked out, that's potentially significant for a bigger top tube unit from Bosch coming soon. But I think everyone in the sort of mature, let's say, e-bike motor market is going to have to do some stepping up to compete with the latest stuff from DJI. I'll be really interested to ride that DJI bike if I can, because I've seen some very interesting reviews on it, and the numbers certainly seem to be properly out of the park. Whereas this bike is essentially as conventional as it looks in terms of being a bike. Yes, the latest Bosch motor. Yeah, it's very well evolved geometry, but it's not outlandish in any way. And I mean, it does ride exceptionally well, don't get me wrong. I think I've ridden a lot of 4-bar bikes over the past 30 years. People have been making them, and I've ridden, a reasonable amount of 4-bar e-bikes as well. And this really does stand out as being one of the most polished examples I've ever swung a leg over, which is low-key annoying, to be honest, because when I gate crashed the Santa Cruz engineer chat, couldn't get out to the actual launch for family reasons, but a colleague of mine, Rich from Bike Perfect, actually, I video called him during the presentation and threw him under the bus with a lot of awkward questions to the Santa Cruz guys while I was there. And I was like, so why is this not essentially a Marin? Because, that's a 4-bar e-bike. And they were like, because they were engineers, they just said, oh, well, it's because of the kinematic and, how we've arranged the pivots and, our experience in suspension, which I thought was basically them going, oh, yeah, we've been playing with 4-bar for months, but because we're dead good at it, our bike is going to be better than people who've been playing at it for decades, which smacked me as massively cocky. But I have to say, it played out on the trail. And the thing they didn't talk about, which is kind of the invisible benefits of going with Santa Cruz, and yeah, I mean, accuse me of hyping it if you want, but these are genuine things. They have really, really good QC. Their frames are extremely well made. They're very strong. You see very, very few failures with Santa Cruz frames. I've not seen one in the field. I'm sure they do happen, but they're definitely rare. And they're backed up with a genuine no questions asked warranty on them. But also things like the fact that all Santa Cruz bikes, rather than being built in the Far East and then just shipped to a distributor and then fired out to shops from there, all the frames are bought into Santa Cruz, a fully solar-powered, eco as possible facility in Santa Cruz, where they're all assembled by hand by Santa Cruz themselves. And you can argue that, it doesn't make a difference where a bike is put together. But I think there is a difference between people who are working in a building labelled Santa Cruz, using frames that they've got from their own factory, and then they're building them up, as fully, Western paid and valued employees who get all those Western employee rights. And, that's all guaranteed when you buy a Santa Cruz. And also, Santa Cruz invest a lot back into the mountain biking community with things like the paid advocacy and trail creation program, and just generally being, good, responsible members of the mountain biking community as far as possible, which you might not always get with a brand which is just trying to push all their prices down to the lowest level to get sales that way. What else do I need to say? Anything else? Oh, yeah. It comes in CC and C versions. So, yeah, CC is wireless only. C is wired as well, if that's still a thing for you. And there's a range of different build kits on this bike. This is, certainly towards the top end of them. But to be honest, I'm not going to put prices in, because by the time I've done pricing, if you watch this in 3 months' time, it might have changed. So it's not really that relevant. You can Google that. That's your homework. If you really, really want to talk about the bike and know about the pricing, then Google it for your appropriate region, wherever you're watching this in the world. But one thing I would say, I think wherever you do Google that price, I think you'll be surprised, especially after everything I've just said, how competitive this Vala is on pricing. I mean, if you look at someone like Cube, they're significantly cheaper. But on the other hand, Trek are more expensive. And it kind of lines up with people like White, Specialized. Canyon haven't got a similar bike at the moment.
And even bikes with aluminium frames and aluminium rims aren't that much cheaper than a bike you're looking at here with a premium quality carbon frame and premium quality carbon wheels. So the bit where I try and think of things that are wrong with this bike to try and sound more balanced. The battery is fixed, so you can't pull it out without dismantling the whole motor. So that might not suit some people. Go look at a Trek Rail or something like that if you want a battery that you can pull out easily for travelling, for just dragging inside for charging, that kind of thing. But again, that adds advantages in terms of weight and efficiency and the sealing of the whole system and the strength of the frame, because you haven't got a door in the frame. It's a closed tube. And like I said, obviously these tyres do add a lot of weight, and it is quite a gravity build. So you could put lighter tyres on it and you probably get a significant amount more range out of the bike as well. And it'd be more poppy and agile. But I'm pretty sure I haven't double checked it yet. I've asked a few people, not got a confirmed reply. I'm pretty sure this CX motor has the same mounting now as the SX motor, or at least it's very adaptable. So there's a very strong chance, I reckon, we could be seeing a Vala SL coming along. This is just me speculating. This is not I wonder if we're going to see, knowing full well we are. But a bike with this frame, lighter wheels, maybe lighter kit, maybe a 36, because that still worked great as a 150, 160 length. And then the significantly lighter, it's a kilo lighter motor, and then a 400 watt-hour battery in here, plus the Power More extender option would still stand. You're looking at a bike that's then the same weight as basically the Heckler XL, but on a Bosch-based system. So I'd be really, really interested in that joining the Santa Cruz lineup, and we'll have to see if my tea leaf predictions there come out to be true. But otherwise, I'm really struggling to find something negative to say about this bike, and frankly, I'm itching to go out and ride it again at the earliest opportunity, because it was a huge amount of fun. In a way, it was a huge amount of fun in the way it combined that massive gravity capability, but without feeling like an absolute tank on the trails. So, yeah, pretty sure they nailed this one.
Hang on, sudden objectivity newsflash after recording the main edit. I was just pulled this little protective waterproof, sealing flap off the Bosch battery connector to recharge it, and it's fallen clean out, and now I can't get it back in. So I don't know whether this is it looks like it's a Bosch thing rather than a Santa Cruz thing, but yeah, it's a Bosch part. So I imagine this is the case on a lot of these new CX bikes. It might even be a case on other Bosch bikes as well. But this pish flap is pish poor. So be careful when that sounds like it. No, still not in. Right, I'm going to need both hands to do this, but be careful. It's a bit like those vans where I know mine's the same, if you have to open the fuel tank thing for opening the front door, and you see them all driving about with them missing. But you don't want your charger connector missing if you're riding about in typical English weather. So I'm going to have to do that properly. But yes, we have an issue. So there we go. I am objective and will tell you if there are problems with bikes.
So there you go. There's my tech talk through on the latest Santa Cruz Vala. And, while it obviously does have a lot of similarities, a lot more similarities than previously to other e-bikes on the market, there are still significant differences in the details and in the way it rides. Please watch the live ride review. You'll get a much better idea of what this bike is actually like on the trail by literally being on the trail with me as I do my first ride on the bike, which I'll link at the end. But I still think there are very, very valid, I didn't actually mean to pun that, but it happened anyway, reasons to go with Santa Cruz, whether it's the eco credentials, whether it's the customer backup, whether it's little details like, that quad bearing rear end that really does make a tiny but significant difference, that higher level feel in terms of precision. and sensitivity on the trail. And yeah, I mean, I think all those details do make a difference to the overall package and the overall sort of ownership experience of a Santa Cruz. But obviously, we've got comments below this video, so let me know what you think in those. Oh, said like a proper YouTuber almost. But yeah, massive thanks to Santa Cruz for lending me this bike for test. Huge thanks to my industry sponsors. And if you're thinking of shopping for mountain bike kit, then please consider those guys because they support me on the channel. So if you support them, that lovely upward circle will continue, and you'll get more videos. I'll be able to make more videos, and everybody will be happy. Huge thanks as always to my Patreon subscribers who pledge on a monthly basis, and their investment in the channel really does make a huge difference to its sustainability as I'm moving more and more towards being mostly YouTube based, as more and more of the websites I work for gradually peter out to nothing. So if you really like what I'm doing with the channel, please consider supporting me on Patreon. But if you can't do that at the moment, fully understand. It's only the price of a cup of tea and a biscuit. But you know, not everybody's got that spare at the moment. But if you could click for notifications, click to subscribe, watch this video to the end and give it a thumbs up like, those are all things that you can do for free that make a massive difference to how much YouTube shares my content and how much the channel will grow as a result. But for now, thanks very much for watching. It's been a bit of a random all over the place this one, but hopefully you've got something out of it. Let me know in the comments if there's anything more you want answering. Check out the Bronson video, which is quite relevant to this. Check out the Heckler SL video, which is definitely relevant to this. Definitely check out the live ride video as well, which is what I'll link at the end. But for now, I've been Guy Kestevan on Guy Kes TV, talking about the brand new Santa Cruz Vala Bosch powered E-Mtb.